Good morning. I wanted to address maybe 3 points, but they're all related to the same idea, right? And that is the observation of the Irish mind, right? So three of the things that I've seen, one of them was related to the Waterford protest, which looked like a very busy day, an eventful day, and a wide-ranging day in terms of topics, right? And the first point I'll make is related to that. I've seen a lot of comments underneath people's speeches, right? And they was talking about not allowing certain people to talk at protests because of the topics that they're interested in, right? So if they're talking about COVID or the vaccinations or banks or any of this sort of stuff, right? So the emphasis was thrust on keep it to immigration, okay? That's very problematic, to use a 20 in vogue word, right? That's problematic. But what's interesting to me about that is, on the one hand, you have these protests to do what, right? To protest the decisions that are made by the government, the consequences that are felt by the people as a result of those decisions being implemented, right, across the board and across the country. People want to come out and voice their opposition to that. To try and direct that, or to try and demean anybody who wants to talk about some other pressing concern in this country, and to try and bottleneck opinions and perspectives and conversations into one area. I struggle to see the difference between that person and the very government that's sitting there now, that wishes to bring in hate speech laws, that wishes to follow nearly everything you say, believe, and think, and criminalize you for it, right? I don't see any difference to that. And the counter argument might be, well, look, it's a pragmatic approach, that we don't want to be talking about things that are too kind of off the wall, right? Because it'll put regular everyday people off from listening, from getting involved, from associating with people. Lads, so what? Those people's decisions are already made, right? And if you're going to kowtow to the opinions of other people that you don't really know yet, for the sake of maybe getting people on side who've already decided that they've no interest in anything you have to say, that is a self-defeating action to take. That is an absolutely self-detonating approach to take. And in the meantime, you're also alienating a lot of people who do have things to say and do have concerns about other decisions that this government has been making. So, as William Blake said, the hand that crushes the tyrant's head becomes a tyrant in its stead, right? So be very careful of trying to shut people up because they're not all on board with your one solution, or one highlighting of the one problem that's causing all the ills in this country, right? Be very wary of that, and observe that as well, right? Watch that, recognize that when you see it in people, when they're taking that approach and they're trying to bottleneck opinions into one, trying to corral it into one enclosure. That's not good, right? And that's how you manipulate crowds, is to crystallize their perspective around one thing, and then you can control the whole lot of them people, because you can just readjust the issue that their attention's focused on, and then you dilute and you water down the energy that's behind that, right? So it can't just be about one topic. In the same vein, I seen a video by Martin Murphy who was talking about like mini protests, and he had a Sinn Féin card, and he was saying, let's put this in on front of our tax discs, right? And you've people, again, not everyone, right, but enough to carry a bit of momentum, right? You've people slating him for it, saying, look, you're trying to get people in trouble, this will never work, you can't just go breaking the law. Yeah, maybe. But that leads to a bigger question, right? So don't do that or this or the other thing because you're running the risk of getting arrested. And if people support you and engage in that behavior, or another one, they might also run the risk of being arrested too. You're caught then, aren't you really? You're caught. You're caught, because all that the system would need to do in order to retain control is slowly, and this is what's happening, right? Slowly criminalize the very tools that you would use to combat the system. Okay? They just criminalize it. And then because we're such good behaved Irish people who don't want to be seen as bad, or don't want to be seen as getting anything wrong, or don't want to be seen as breaking the law or being a criminal, we just abide by whatever crime or whatever laws are rolled out. Right? At the same time, we are bombarded with populations of people who don't shy away from jail time, don't shy away from getting arrested, right? In fact, they actively use this as a way of furthering their ideology and their worldview. And I'll use the Muslim population as an example of that, because you can see it in England and you'll see it in other countries as well, France as well, right? That they will come into the country, they will end up in jail, some of them, and then they radicalize the prisons in there. Right? They radicalize the prisons in there. Everyone that's in prison is absolutely ripe for psychological programming, right? Because you're in a state of learned helplessness. There's nothing you can do to change your situation in the moment, really. You know? You're in a somewhat quasi-sensory deprived situation where you can't go out and walk to whatever degree you'd like to, right? You can't breathe fresh air when you want, right? So there's massive social pressures as well, right? You're on guard the whole time. You're agitated and angry and ready to go most of the time. So you're not thinking clearly. You're not in a position to be using the clearest of minds that you possibly could when you're in prison. So people end up being radicalized, and for protection and for having people around you, all that sort of stuff, right? So Muslims will use prison as a positive, whereas Irish people will use it to shut down other Irish people and stop ideas from spreading, because they won't carry them out. And this is what Irish people need to get on board with. We can have all Irish people looking at something the exact same way. Doesn't work, never has worked, and it leads to tyranny in this country. You cannot impose that on Irish people. Our history shows us that. We need to be free, and we will fight to be free, to be able to look and perceive the world in any way we want. Metaphysically, cosmologically, and morally. Right? Morally. There's no one size fits all in terms of morality in Ireland. There just isn't. Right? We elevate certain values above others, right? But the idea of, I suppose, it's the Christian ethic, right? That there's one great good news for everybody, and everyone should abide by that, and we all do abide by it, and we try our... That's not true, man. Like, that is a lie. That is a lie, because the very people, right? Look, you probably know some of them. As soon as they will look down their nose at someone for breaking one law, but as soon as it benefits them to break the law, that law or another law, they'll break it, not a bother. And they'll rationalize away why it's okay for them to do that, but it's not for other people. And other people need to be condemned for breaking a law. So this is the way Irish people work. We are aimed and motivated by our own personal moral values than we are by laws. Do you know? Someone who's given out about drug addicts or whatever you want, pick something, right? Will have no bother texting and talking on the phone while they're driving. Do you know? So it's not a case of we love all laws and we'll apply them generally as the Christian ethic would suggest, right? We don't hold that in Ireland. And anyone claiming to hold that is a hypocrite. Watch them long enough and they are a hypocrite. We are guided by our own personal morality. And we need to be open to that, understand that, and accept that other people differ in degrees in terms of their morality as well, right? And I don't mean accept people that want to do rotten things to other people. Of course not. Of course not. But some people would have no issue with going in and burning something to the ground. They don't care if there's laws around that. They will do it because they believe it to be right, in whatever the circumstance is. And you'll have other people that will condemn and alienate somebody who's willing to do that, even though they might agree with 99% of other things, for the sake of not being seen with that person and not being seen to be a criminal, right? Until the time comes where we can accept all perspectives of an Irish persuasion in terms of morality, within certain bounds, obviously, right? There's obvious natural laws that can't be broken. You can't steal from people. Not their stuff, not their time, not their minds, right? And not their safety nor their freedom. Anything outside of that, fine, because that covers an awful lot, right? The rest are nearly victimless crimes. And in victimless crimes, it's okay to have a big, wide spectrum of people's agreement or disagreement on whether these things are valuable or whether these things are just personal preference or not, or whether they should be, right? But we can't fall into a purity spiral of trying to sanitize the conversation so it's acceptable to people that are already in opposition to us, or to you, or to me, whatever. You can't do that, because you end up, this is why everybody votes for a dictator, right? Adopting that approach, you end up becoming drop the hammer fascist, right? Total tyrannical governance. Because you'll just squeeze out the rest of the conversations that you don't want, or you think are kind of personally embarrassing in some way, right? So let us put that stuff aside. Let us understand that what we're looking at is probably personal preference based on our own personal values, and that we cannot universalize them and try and claim that other people should hold the same lines that we do or walk with the same pace that we do, right? We each have our own rhythms, and I would suggest to people that they be vigilant around this with themselves, but other people too. And don't be afraid of saying this to people either. Joe, so you're at anti-immigrant protest, or a protest about the forcing of people onto Ireland and the demographic changes in Ireland. You're at that protest. You're protesting against that and against the government. The government who are also trying to introduce hate speech laws to stop you from being able to voice your opposition to that. And what's your response? To try and silence other Irish people from having different conversations because you don't like them. This is where we are. And this is why this political game just continues on and on and on. Because all they have to do is change the scenery. Right? And now they're after getting you wholeheartedly to accept tyranny. And if you were to get into power yourself, these types, they would implement that immediately. Right? This is why tyranny is never really imposed from the top down. It's summoned from the grassroots up, right? The people, the majority of people already accept it. That's why you get no reaction to it, or not as big a reaction as you would like to it when it's clear as day, because people psychologically and morally have already accepted it, and they have laid the groundwork for it to just roll itself out unopposed, right? And I think wanting to shut Irish people up from having conversations about things that are legitimate, right? And even if they're not, even if they're pure spoofery, let people decide that for themselves, right? Let people decide that for themselves. I think the fact that you're seeing these tendencies, people are cleansing themselves from looking serious and looking reasonable, and let them, right? Let them be. Was there anyone else or anything else? Oh yeah, the other one then was the idea of staged false flag psyop exercises, right? Being sold as legitimate. And the one I'm talking about is no. The incident that has me talking about that is the guy in Dublin stabbing the guard. Okay, I don't know if that I don't know the ins and outs in that. I don't know the man that done it. I don't know the guards that were involved in it. I don't know the people that were recording it. I don't know any of it. Is it true? Did it happen? It looks like it happened. But that video also looked a little bit bizarre, right? And whether that is real, legitimate or not is kind of besides the point. You're now seeing Irish people condemn other Irish people as well for just posing the question of the potential for certain videos being staged or managed, right? Acting, essentially. Are they false flags? And people are saying you can't get into that. Don't get into that. Stop talking about that. You're making everyone look stupid. No, again, this is your personal fear of looking stupid socially. Being made a fool of publicly. Being embarrassed in front of others. That's your issue. That's your issue. So don't use your personal weakness to try and shut someone else up from using their minds and asking legitimate questions. Right? We ask the question and then we gather the evidence if we want. Right? But there's absolutely nothing wrong with asking a question around that. Around anything. Provided you're willing to change your mind as evidence manifests or shows itself, okay? That's all fine and well. But you see a common thread here, right? And then another one, the last one I'll have, is we had the protest, the tax thing, the psyops, the voting. This is something that the Irish people seem really opposed to putting their hands into, or to even entertaining, right? The idea that elections would be rigged. It's weird, like, so it's we don't want to be seen to be sore losers, right? So, and I get it, but fair is fair, right? If you really believe that you're now living under a system that is actively pursuing an end-of-life treatment for the Irish race as in totality, right? But you don't want to talk about certain topics that the state might be involved in because you don't want to look like you're a sore loser, or that you're being petty, or that you're a conspiracy theorist. I think you're missing the bigger picture. Right? And I think this is also magnifies and highlights a serious flaw in Irish people. That we can understand the worst of potentials coming down the pike, right? But so long as we have a little bit of time left between now and Armageddon, right? Or the total obliteration of anything worthwhile in terms of living in Ireland. So long as we have a little bit of time left, we want to shine up our social ego and look as pristine to other people that we don't know as much as possible. That's bizarre. You can't have both, because if you wanna stand on principle and be aimed at something good and true in the world now and pulling it into the present from the future, right? You're going to run the risk of annoying a lot of people. And if those people then point the finger and say you're a big fool for looking at this, and your reaction to that is to drop the principled battles you've been involved in for the sake of how other people view you, you're no good to anybody. You're no good to anybody. You're better off just watching television and not talking about anything, because you can be easily dominated and moved and used by the herd, right? So I would put away the phone and put away anything to do with anything serious, because if you're that way inclined, man, you're in big trouble, and you drag other people into big trouble with you. That's all I have to say about that. It's a worry and concern, but I also do think that silver linings, right? There's a lot of stories coming out about these politicians now. You had the Fine Gael fella who peppered on. So he was an Indian guy. He was a Lord Mayor, I think, of South Dublin, and he's allegedly involved in rinsing money out of student nurses or nurses that are coming over here as agency fees, right? So you're part of a party that's their policy is to manipulate the system a little bit, right? Massage it into a point where it's not beneficial for Irish nurses and doctors to stay here. So they leave. And then you can justify bringing in probably more nurses and doctors on the same budget, right? And that's, if that's not good enough, then you might save a few quid or be able to get 4 nurses for the price of 3, right? If that's not good enough, you now have these people who are part of that party and are now benefiting again financially, illegally, from that very process. We will promote the importing of foreign nurses, and then we'll essentially extort money from them as agency fees, as an elected politician. So that's coming out. You've Simon Harris, who's just a never-ending catastrophe, right? He's just a never-ending catastrophe. And I think that if I was in, say, Pascal Donoghue's kind of position, or Simon Coveney's, at the time Varadkar stood down, lads, they just let him put his head on the block there. They knew what was coming. There's no sustainability in their party. Their party's not going anywhere. And I think these guys knew that. That's why they never wanted to be the leader. So he's your fall guy. He'll take the hit. But Micheál Martin, for decades and decades and decades now, just keeps slithering in the background, right? So he has a lot of things well tied up, you know. He's well protected and insulated, because I think he leaves other people do the heavy lifting and they take the hits. But he's the one perennial, really, isn't he? And background staffers or whatever as well. But yeah, look, I suppose to sum it up, I only see what's going on as positive, right? Overall, there's things that obviously you'd wish, click of a fingers, would be gotten rid of out of the country and changed. But on the whole, it's a movement forward, right? And it's a positive move. If you look at Canada now, so in certain places they're after banning. There's I think nearly a $30,000 fine for going into the woods. You're not allowed into the woods in certain provinces now, or certain cities or areas. You're not allowed in. What are they saying? The risk of wildfires. So you've climate lockdowns now in Canada. I don't think they're even going to bother trying anything like that. Not that we have any legitimate woods left in this country, which is another conversation for another day. But I don't think they'd bother trying to roll that out in Ireland. I don't think that stuff's going to gain any traction in Ireland again, which is a positive, right? So if you look at the amount of people that are maybe just a bit disgruntled with the COVID stuff at the time, but there's a novelty to it, so we get on with it, versus the amount of people that are opposed to what's going on at the moment with the government and what's going on in Ireland generally. It's massive, right? It's night and day. And I think it's only grown. And that is a positive. And look, because of the size and the scale of the control that has been in Ireland, we need help from outside, right? We need help from areas of the world that we're not really used to, right? And if that comes in the form of a Conor McGregor, take it. If it comes in the form of American support, take it. Take it all day long. And remember, every one of us as Irish people, whether you're a heroin addict that lives on a street corner somewhere, right, and don't even feel safe enough going into the hostels, if you're sleeping rougher than rough and living rougher, what you have to say is valuable. You have value to give. You have something to say about the working of your country and about your living of your life in this country, right? You have a mind. You can use it. You can think. That person has just as every right to offer whatever perspective they want on whatever evil they see in this country as some architect or some banker has around the immigration problems or IPAS centres, right? You can't beat people into seeing the world your preferred way of perceiving the world. You can't do that. It's anti-Irish. It's anti-human. And it is anti-freedom.